curious. I am curious. Curious
by nature.
Welcome to Curious by Nature. I'm Jessica Johnson from Newswise. Insects are everywhere, shaping ecosystems, inspiring innovations, and occasionally crawling their way into our nightmares. But for science communicator Jules Bernstein, bugs are more than just background noise. They're a gateway to wonder, curiosity, and the wild complexity of the natural world. As a senior public information officer at UC Riverside, Jules covers everything from agricultural breakthroughs to the untold stories of the insect world. She's also the creator and host of Can I Bug You?, a podcast that digs into the surprising ways bugs intersect with our lives. Sometimes delighting, sometimes disturbing, but always informing. Today, she joins us to talk about the power of storytelling in science, how she built her podcast from the ground up, and why insects might just deserve a little more respect. Jules, welcome. Can you start by introducing yourself?
So I am Jules Bernstein. I am a senior public information officer for the University of California, Riverside. I cover our College of Natural and Agricultural Sciences, as well as a couple of departments in our College of Engineering. So in effect, I am a science writer. I'm curious about everything. That's why I was a journalist for 20 years and why I still love to write about science and all the discoveries that people make. I'm curious about it all and how it works.
So I'm so happy to speak with you today because I have really enjoyed your podcast. And Can I Bug You? That's the title of it. It fascinates me and also creeps me out a little bit sometimes. But I do find that it's so amazing how insects, they affect our lives in so many different ways. And so maybe you can just tell us what got you started in creating that podcast.
So I started at UC Riverside in 2019 and was assigned to UCR Magazine, a UCR Magazine story. For that story, I had to follow two entomologists into the Chiricahua Mountains in Arizona to a place in the Chiricahua Mountains, a research station that's considered a sky island because it's so high up and the climate up there is so entirely different from what you think of as Arizona. It's considered an island and biodiversity is really high, and these entomologists were looking for a particular insect. And so I went to chronicle their search for this insect, native lanternfly, because you may or may not know that on the East Coast, they have a huge problem with Chinese lanternflies that can, among other things, kill grapevines. And on the West Coast, that's a big problem, especially for the wine industry. So we have some people, particularly Mark Hoddle at UC Riverside, who specialize in trying to use less toxic means to control pests and releasing the natural enemy of a pest instead of using insecticide. But before you can unleash a pest's natural enemy, you have to find out if you're going to be doing any damage to the native version of whatever insect you're trying to fight. So that's what they were doing, because we don't know anything about native lanternflies here in the West Coast because they're not a pest. They don't bother anyone. They don't hurt humans or crops. So we don't really know much about them. So we were up there hunting for those to preemptively try to begin some kind of program for when, not if, the lanternflies reach the West Coast. Anyways, I was on this trip with Doug Yanniga, who's now my co-host of the podcast, and Mark Hoddle. And I realized that these guys are such great storytellers and fountains of information and have such big personalities that I just would never be able to capture in a press release. So I started thinking, God, it would be great to have them on a microphone so people could hear these guys. Doug in particular is a human encyclopedia of bug knowledge. I mean, he really is one of the few people in the country, if not the world, that can identify any insect you put in front of him down to the species, the family, the taxa. Like, He's just incredibly knowledgeable. He's dedicated his whole life to this stuff. He's also from upstate New York and has this really dry sense of humor, and I just thought he was great, and I thought to myself, "One of these days, I'm gonna put that guy on a microphone." So that's where the idea came from.
What are a couple of your favorite episodes?
We had Christian Weihrauch, from our entomology department talking about true bugs, and in particular, kissing bugs, which, that was our Valentine's Day episode because 'cause they're kissing bugs. But kissing bugs are not romantic. They are called kissing bugs because they tend to bite your face and mouth, and they're pretty insidious. They have a numbing agent, so you really don't know it when they're biting you. But after they're through doing a blood feed, they poop on you, and their poop transmits Chagas disease, which can make you really sick. So it was really interesting learning about them.
Do you have, or were there any episodes that you found to be kind of the strangest ones in some way? Or surprising information that you learned?
Well, we did one called the Insect Olympics, which
Mhm.
basically Doug just telling us statistics for like which insect wins the gold medal in a contest on the for the fastest flyer or the farthest jumper or the longest insect, which is a stick insect. I think the record holder is about 2 feet long, but it only weighs an ounce. They're really skinny.
Mm.
Or like I think the fastest or the farthest jumper is a flea. It can jump 7 inches vertically and horizontally about 13 inches, which doesn't seem like much unless you consider that that's 60 times their own body length, in height and 100 times in distance. That's like a man jumping 656 feet horizontally or more than 300 feet vertically. We had a Christmas episode, How the Roach Stole Christmas, and we had a guest entomologist, doctoral candidate Jun Bloom, who studies German cockroaches, which are one of the most significant urban pests in the world. And he explained to us that the best way to control them is with gel baits, both because sprays don't always get into all the crevices where roaches hide, but baits can be anywhere. They attract the bugs eat it, and then they die. But then to some extent, they share the toxic bait with other roaches through their poop and vomit because the roaches will vomit things they don't like and other roaches will eat it. And roaches will eat each other's poop. And then when the roach dies from the poison, the other roaches eat the dead roach and they get poisoned.
These are just the gel baits like that you can buy at a supermarket?
Yes, which I didn't think I could be more disgusted by roaches than I already was, but lo and behold, I am more disgusted by them than I used to be, but also impressed at how resourceful they are. They'll eat anything to survive. They're like the pigeons of the insect world.
From your podcast, I really learned that a pest isn't just a word for something to be pestering you. There's a scientific, I guess, meaning behind it, right? That it is a pest and it doesn't have value to anything. Is that correct? Can you explain that more?
I would say that for something to be classified as a pest, it causes harm to humans or other animals or the environment and doesn't provide a benefit that we're aware of.
So, other types of pests that might be particularly annoying. I mean, flies, you've said that they're one of the better pollinators, so there's a purpose to them and there's a benefit.
I mean, just it's kind of like weeds are just plants we don't like. I guess there's some subjectivity to it, and flies are a good example of that. They're great pollinators, better pollinators, in fact, than butterflies. Everyone thinks of butterflies as being great pollinators, but they're really not, which is something I learned from doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, in point of fact, flies are more effective at that. But if you land on your picnic, you'll be mad. So
Is it challenging to think of topics for next episodes, or do you feel like you have endless curiosity about this topic?
so going back to the kissing bugs, they are part of a insect family that if you so they're part of a true bugs family, and if you include relatives like aphids and cicadas, which are Hemiptera, there's more than 100,000 species. So it's one of the largest groups of insects on Earth, and that's just one of them. We had an episode on weevils, and it turns
Mm.
out, 1 out of every 15 species on Earth is a weevil. So I feel like there's so many of them, and they do so many things. It would be hard to fully run out of topics. They're covering this Earth every day. One recent episode that I found fascinating, both because it falls outside the norm of what we usually cover on the podcast, and has to do with psychology, but also because my own family, my mother's a social worker, my aunt was a social worker, my grandmother was a social worker, and my grandfather was a professor of psychiatry. And so psychological topics have a special place in my heart. And we talked about a subject called delusory parasitosis. It's not strictly about bugs, it's more about people who have a delusion that they are infected, that their skin is infected with bugs. And I didn't realize how incredibly common this is, until we did the episode, and Doug shared that in his 26 years at UCR, he's probably got a call about this at least every week. Somebody calling him, not to diagnose them, but to confirm that they're not crazy. Which, of course, well, I don't wanna say that they're crazy, they are suffering from an issue that could stem from an actual medical condition. In many cases, it's potentially related to menopause, that hormonal changes can sometimes exacerbate a condition like this or even cause it. There could be other causes, but I found it interesting, the majority of people, it seems, suffering from this are female and, potentially menopausal or postmenopausal.
Also, there is something that we have all seen, maybe in movies or heard about through phrases like the feeling of bugs crawling on you. And so I didn't know that that was necessarily a kind of a pathological issue, but I it seems like we've all felt that way at some point in our lives, probably.
It's true. There are only I'm trying to remember, there's only 2 insects known to infest human bodies. One is scabies and one is lice, and both there are treatments for both of those things. Um, what delusory parasitosis, I don't know what insect people think is invading them, they're just convinced there's something there. And there's really no talking them out of it, and they'll pester entomologists and doctors and insist that something's happening, but it isn't. I mean, it could be that hormonal changes dry out your skin so you feel itchy, and you can't understand because you don't see anything causing the itch, but it's coming from inside.
In terms of bugs and public health, would you say that there's something that's in particularly important at the moment that might be the highest risk to public health?
Since the beginning of time, there's been sort of a battle between human agriculture and pests that want to eat the food we're growing for ourselves. And I think some of those battles are intensifying because as the planet warms, the habitat range of certain pests expands and makes them a bigger threat to our agriculture and the food we're trying to grow for ourselves. So, if you like eating, I would say that agriculture pests are a huge threat and continue to be.
Mhm.
We recently um, came out from one of the biggest fruit fly infestations that we've ever had. Um, and we had a extension specialist, Bodil Cass, on our show to talk about that. So, yes, I think in terms of human health, if you're talking about nutrition and um, food security, then I think insects are one of the biggest problems. And there's so many different ones coming after all the food. And then, of course, mosquitoes, one of the deadliest animals on earth. And which kind of goes towards something we covered in one of the earlier episodes. We had a two-parter episode called "What You Packin' Pollinators," and it was all about all the things that pollinators carry around with them that aren't pollen, and it turns out microbes, bacteria, and fungi are ever present, not just in pollinators, but other insects too. Like, for example, with Chagas disease, the kissing bugs, it's not the kiss or the bite that makes you sick, it's the protozoans that live in their intestinal tract and in their poop that make you sick. So it's not the bugs themselves, they're vectors for these things. That's also, the biota of the world have been locked in a struggle since the beginning of time, but it's not going away anytime soon. We discover a strategy and they find a way to get around it, and it's this dance that will continue probably forever.
Do you have any other questions you would like me to ask?
One or two thoughts I would leave you with. I would say, one, um, I do think insects are wildly misunderstood. You know, you hear a name like kissing bugs and you start with this misconception, "Oh, that sounds cute," or "bed bugs just bite." And then when you learn about them, the learning reveals just how bizarre or intense their biology really is, like the way that Chagas is transmitted or the way that bed bugs mate, which is traumatic insemination. The males have an appendage that's shaped like a dagger, and they pierce the abdomen of the female to to inseminate them. And even something as familiar as a roach or a weevil turns out to have surprising traits or crazy evolutionary backstories. So I think they're misunderstood, and there's so much room to learn about them and just appreciate sort of how creative evolution really is.
As we're growing up in school, there's tendency for, let's say, people to try to get more comfortable with insects and bugs. But at the same time, you hear all of these stories about them biting you and pooping on your face, and that it's kind of, maybe we should keep them away. Maybe we should have these distances from them. That it's so hard to tell which ones you should and you shouldn't keep a distance from, right?
I mean, the truth is, there's not really keeping your distance from insects, even if you want to. There's so many more of them than there are of us. So the best thing we can do is understand them and learn to appreciate them, I think. Um, Whether you think they're gross or amazing, they are so incredibly unlike humans. And I want to say that doing this podcast made me a better science writer, but it's not true because bugs on their own are so interesting. I don't have to do anything to make them interesting. They already are.
Yeah, that's really interesting from the science writing perspective and how you see the difference, and you wanted to create kind of this podcast in order to share more than maybe what you were able to share with your writing. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. I mean, I was a journalist for 20 years before I took this position at ECR, and I think I know a good story when I see one, whether it's a story about science or a story about anything. A good story sticks in your mind. You think about it, you turn it over after you've heard it, and bugs inherently do that. When we learn about what they are and how they live, whether you think they're gross or not, they stay with you, like, when you learn about them, and to me, I don't have to do much to turn them into a good story. They just inherently are because they're so fascinating and weird and gross and amazing and beautiful and all of it.
But I guess you are still writing about many other topics. What are the ones that you find challenging?
Well, it's always a little bit of a challenge to write about basic science. I cover like statistics and chemistry and math, and some of the things in those departments, they don't really grab headlines because it's sort of insider baseball with they made some, you know, discovery that only other chemists might understand or really be interested in. And then you have to sort of pitch the story in terms of, all right, well, what could this discovery lead to down the road, even if that particular discovery or their particular paper has no immediate application and they never intended for it to. You kinda have to pull one out and sell it that way. So that's a little challenging because then the scientists are always thinking, "Well, this application has nothing to do with what I did. I just did it for the sake of doing it." And you think, "I get that, but most people reading this are not chemists, so how can we make them understand why at a public university you're using public funds to do something that may never affect them?"
So important, especially now, right? To be able
Right,
to
and the truth is these discoveries do affect people.
right.
Without them, we wouldn't have many of the modern conveniences we have, medicine and technology and any of it, but connecting those dots for people is sometimes difficult.
Yes, and really, I mean, that's the role that science writers are offering, is to be able to translate, to communicate that really essential science and to either help people be curious about it or to help them learn and to know and be aware of certain things. I highly value what you're doing, and I think it's great, and I hope that more people will, be doing science writing and appreciating science writing.
I do offer workshops to faculty to try to help them use less jargon when they speak and speak more intentionally and even in sound bites for journalists who have limited time and space to tell stories, and encourage our scientists to make the case for themselves as only they can, that the work they're doing benefits us all.
Thank you, Jules. I really appreciate our conversation.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.